Hi everyone, I'm Amelia from the Brand Experience team and welcome to the last episode of the year for our Money Wisdom podcast. I'm really excited to have my co-host here, Isaac, to be on the receiving end of being interviewed, and we are going to be talking about his latest article. It's called Why a Good Outcome Doesn't Always Mean You've Made a Good Decision. So, hi Isaac, welcome to the show.
Hi Amelia.
How does it feel being on the receiving end?
Shouldn't Chris be here? Isn't
he's having a good time with his family on holiday. So how does it feel like being on the receiving end?
Yeah, I mean, finally it's my turn to be on the hot seat.
Finally.
I'm ready to be grilled by you.
Not grilled. Have a nice conversation together. Yeah, without the pressure of our boss here, right? No.
Yeah.
Okay, so for your article, it's really interesting. It talks about how lottery winners, when told that, doesn't mean a good outcome is what a good decision, right? They might feel like, you're being jealous. So what inspired you to write this article?
Every year we have to write an article, right? And I think, for all our listeners, if you go to our website, you can see under Insights, you can see many different articles that our people from Providend have written. And for my submission, I was thinking about writing about something that was, I would not say troubling me throughout the year, but it comes out from time to time, and really is when I meet clients and there's a lot of resistance to diversifying out of their company positions, and there are various reasons why, and I've stated it in my article, but really that's behind why I wanted to write this article.
Okay, so I can understand as a client, right? Let's say I work at Google and then I want to own some of the stocks, right? Because if I see my colleagues having the stock and the stock goes up, then I'll feel very FOMO, which is like fear of missing out, what you talk about in the article. So how would you guide a client, a hypothetical client like that, to diversify out of just a single stock?
Right, so it's funny that you chose Google Alphabet stock, right? So yes, I think when it comes to owning your company shares, and of course if it does as well as Alphabet has done over the past 10 years, or even more recently Nvidia, which is the example I cited in my article, what I realized is, when we look at the data, this is actually more the exception rather than the norm, right? That your company stock outperform the broader market, right? But what we consume in the news or what we read, what we see on social media, is really, it's always the stocks that do really well, right? Or did really well the past 1 year, 5 years, right? And that's why it's important to recognize that, if you own company shares in these companies, it's not something that is the norm. And also, would the outperformance persist, right? Because what matters is not what the stock did the past 10 years, but what is it going to do for the next 10, 20, 30 years going into your retirement?
So I think it's also recency bias that recently like tech stocks have done really well, and when the stocks plunge to zero, right, nobody really talks about it, and so it doesn't get talked about, and people don't remember all these bad news as well.
Definitely. I think if we look back in the top 10 companies of the S&P 500 over the years, right? So in my article, I showed what the top 10 stocks were in 1974, 1984, 1994, all the way to 2024. And you can see that, the top 10 always change, right? So you have companies like General Electric, AT&T. Of course, today we have Nvidia, Apple. But when they fall off the top 10, they tend to underperform the broader market, right? And before, or rather, when they make the top 10 in the first place, it means that they are a company that is well ran, they have good fundamentals, and typically the outlook is very optimistic, right? But if these, if that's the case, then shouldn't the top 10 not change that much, right, over the years? But that's not what we see. And, it's my fear that, clients that come to us, and there's a bit of a selection bias, right? For us, we serve the affluent, the high net worth. Most of the time, their company stock has done really well. That's why they are here in the first place, right? But it's really important to open their eyes to the fact that it's actually really risky holding on to an outsized position in their company stocks.
So based on evidence, we can tell that it's really risky to just be over concentrated on one stock. So how do you help clients to, or why is it that clients still want to remain so committed to one stock, and how would you help them and guide them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and one of the main reasons why I wrote the article. So how I approached it was more of a in a science way, right? So I try to show the data. I say that look, only 4% of stocks drive the returns of the entire market, right? Yeah. It's normal. That's what the stock market, or rather how the stock market behaves over the years. I try to convince people with all these facts, right, and long-term data, but I realized that it's more of an art problem rather than a science problem, right? And one of the examples I cited in my article is that, imagine you are an NVIDIA employee, right, and over the past 10 years, every time you receive your stock-based compensation, and then you diversify it, and because that's the right thing to do, right? But now all your colleagues are multi-millionaires, right?
Then you're like,
yeah. I think it's always important to recognize that can happen, but it's also important to know that that is really like saying like, oh, you should drop out of school because Bill Gates dropped out of university, or your kid shouldn't continue his study because when we look at even Mark Zuckerberg, right, he's one of the richest men in the world now, he dropped out of school, right? But they are the exception rather than the norm, and we shouldn't focus on those. Yeah. Hi listeners, thank you so much for your ongoing support. Some long-time listeners might know that the inspiration behind this entire podcast was our CEO Chris's book titled Money Wisdom: Simple Truths for Financial Wellness. If you are interested in getting your own signed copy, please check out the link in the show notes for more information. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, so small exceptions are, because the flip side can always happen. Most of the time, probability is that you will not get the returns that you need. Yeah, so maybe this is not really prepared, but can you share more about as clients chase for high returns, right? And in general, as I started out as an investor, I also want the best returns, right? Because more ROI, the better. But how do you relate that to the contentment and the philosophy of sufficiency, which Providend actually we go by very strongly for our clients?
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, first we must find out what is the return, what is enough return for us, right? To live a good life, right? And if let's say the reason why you're holding into a very concentrated position is so that you can be as rich as you can be, right? Then that's not really what we believe in at Providend. It's really about finding out what is the return that you need and how do we get there in a reliable manner, right? So once we have settled that part, right? Once you have settled that part, and then you realize that you have some spare money here and that, then we are all for if you want to speculate, you want to go into you want to hold concentrated position, you want to go to alternative investments, all that, that's fine, right? But the most important thing is we want to make sure that in terms of living a good life, in terms of having that retirement, right, that you want, we secure that first before we do this kind of stuff, rather than speculating to get the returns that you need. That's very risky. Which
is like the short-term thing, right? I just want as much returns as possible versus having enough income for the life that I need, in retirement, wanting to help my children go through the university education, so on and so forth. So I think that is way more important, and that is what sets us apart, right?
Yeah, so can you imagine, if you invest for your children's education, right, using like a single stock position or your company shares, and how hard that conversation will be with your child, right? Say, actually, I set aside some money for you, but the stock didn't do so well, right? In fact, it plummeted like maybe 70-80%, right? Which can happen for
and
especially
a single stock position. At the time where you have to pay for the education.
Yes. So yeah, it's going to be a really difficult conversation, and of course, that's the last thing that we want to happen for our clients. Yeah.
Do you have a real life example or something that as a client advisor you would help clients to escape out of such a situation?
Well, yes. I mean, it's not uncommon that we see clients with outsized company stocks, right, position. So I think for me, what I'll do is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, I initially I started with the science approach, right? But after that, I realized that actually you have to find out if there's any deeper reasons why they're holding on to the company stocks, right? And I realized that actually that is more important. Some of them really love their company, because they feel that as they are working in the company, they have certain feelings for that company,
Which
and how they express it is through owning their stocks, right? So from at least the first step to solving a problem to find out what the problem is, right? Acknowledging there's a problem, and of course find out what that is, and from that angle, then I was trying to convince them and say that I understand that you love it, right? Maybe we can at least find a compromise, right? You can hold your company shares, right? Maybe instead of what I typically recommend, like 5%, maybe you want to hold 10 or 20% of your wealth in your company stock. That's fine. But really, we should try to diversify and get the more reliable returns, right? From diversifying your investments.
Yeah, for non-negotiable life goals,
Yes,
right? Yeah. So I think it's always the evidence base is always the head, but connecting it to the heart is so difficult.
Yeah.
Which is why client advisors like you are very valuable to us to help the clients go through this journey, lah.
Yeah, exactly right. So it's like, if it's so simple, like just showing the data, right? Which I did in my article. I just showed the data has been very clear for many years now, right? In terms of holding on to single stocks, but the problem still persists, right? Many people still hold on to outsized positions in concentrated positions. So that's why it's important to know that to solve it is not just by throwing facts into our client's face, but rather to understand on a deeper level why, the underlying reasons why they choose to hold these stocks.
Yeah, it's about their experience with investments, or like, whether they actually, why they want to hold on to that stock. It's not just so simple. Yeah, like what you said, right? They may love the company, and we try to just diversify. Have some in that company, but diversify the rest to a safer portfolio.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, okay, as we close up this interview, do you have any advice for our listeners on top of what you've written in the article for the year ahead?
Oh, for the year ahead, right? So
so
I'll start with some advice based on the article I've written. Really is to find out the reason why you are holding the stocks, right? Of course, come to a client advisor, or rather seek professional advice if you have to through Providend. But really, really take a step back and try to remove any bias that you might have towards the company, because everyone, if let's say the data shows that a very small minority of stocks outperform the market, but everyone that holds their stock thinks that they're going to outperform, thinks that their company stock is going to outperform the market, right? It's really taking a step back and think that you have to recognize that your stock might not be, it's likely not going to outperform the market in the long run. And are you going to risk your retirement? Are you going to risk your children's education money on these stocks? Yeah, I think that's one advice I would give. It's a bit like how if you ask any worker, even in Providend, right? Are you above average? Right? Everyone will think that they're above average.
So do you think you're above average? Of course.
Yeah, everyone will think they're an above average worker, right? If you do a survey, everybody will say they're above average, right? But that's not possible, right? Because that's kind of a paradox, right? You can't. If everyone is above average, then
there's no average.
There's no average anymore. Yeah. So something like that. I'm not sure if it is exactly like it is a perfect analogy, but that's the thing I can think off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to end the podcast. And I think next year, we are going to have many very exciting topics, and which we'll share more in the weeks to come. So I would like to take this chance on behalf of Isaac and I and the Providend family to wish you all a very blessed Christmas and Happy New Year. And if you like this podcast, please share and like it on your favorite podcast platform. And if you would like to have a conversation with one of our client advisors, please email us communications@providend.com. And with that, we'll see you next year. And thank you for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
All analysis, views, or opinions from interviews, recommendations, and other information broadcasted, podcasted, or published herein are provided for general information purposes only. Information expressed does not take into account any specific situation, particular needs, or objectives, and should not be construed as specific advice or a recommendation. Information has been obtained from sources that are deemed to be reliable, but their accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action. Providend Limited does not accept any liability for any loss whatsoever arising from any use of the information broadcasted, podcasted, or published herein. All contents and information contained herein may not be copied or reproduced in whole or in part by any means without prior consent of Providend Limited.